So Corey asks, questing has become quite a bore lately. What would you do to spice it up a bit? Oh boy.
That's interesting. That's an interesting one. I'm gonna have to go to my recent time playing Classic to answer this one, which is very much make them significantly more difficult and like just more interesting in terms of here's a big thing to do. You have to figure it out. Actually give it some sort of meaning or some sort of gameplay involvement instead of the stuff that you can completely basically autopilot with the quest marker. Because I think that's what gets a lot of it is no matter how well a quest is fed in through the narrative or how nicely the quest text is written, the entire game is just kind of behind you going go go.
That's a really good point. There's something Blizzard have with quests right now where they don't make a video game with a lot of their in-game questing. And the times where they do go and make a video game with their in-game questing, those really stand out. Because it's like, oh, suddenly we get our Warlock Greenfire, or, we get like the more memorable things. It's so interesting what to do with that. Because there's a whole bunch of people, if you give them harder questing, they're just going to, and this could actually be why Blizzard have completely lobotomized so much of that questing flow in World of Warcraft. There were people you make questing actually be relevant and, by, I guess, more objective metrics or something, like good quality gameplay where there's stakes, there is actual need of a mastery loop, all of those things. Blizzard could do that, and then a bunch of people would say, yeah, but this is just a roadblock to me hitting endgame, so I don't care. Why would you do this? Leveling is something I should be able to crank out in 4.5 hours on launch night. For the more like literal, just what do you actually do? I mean, I think mobs need to be harder.
Absolutely.
Mobs need to be harder. Rares and bosses and things like that actually need to be rares and bosses that have mechanics that you need to memorize to defeat. You're in that bit in Bastion or whatever, the Temple of Purity, the stuff goes down.
Yes.
You fight a sort of a mini boss fight.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really feel like much. And then I think about my Covenant campaigns, which I've mentioned in the show before, where it's like, I've just defeated the big bad of my Covenant campaign. I basically didn't notice. It's like that stuff. I mean, the end of my Covenant campaign, that could reach gameplay heights. Maybe not Warlock Greenfire, because it couldn't be tailored to me specifically in terms of like class or spec. But totally some kind of large experience there is possible with so many of these things. I think that would massively elevate the experience, and is basically what they should work towards doing. They had the stones to actually give us strong enough mobs to fight in the likes of Timeless Isle as soon as you went up. And I believe, if memory serves, even some of those Mists of Pandaria rares. I never felt like my Covenant campaign was a bit of fun, engaging content for me to do, because it wasn't. It was lore events that I had to go through completely mind-numbing stuff to get. But it absolutely could have been like almost any other video game where, you get your big cool lore events and stuff like that, but after a tough won battle, hard-fought battle, where you kind of feel like, damn, that was a hard-fought battle, I'm pretty hyped that I did that. But that said, World of Warcraft then has another little issue where it's like, how does Blizzard reward you for that? We killed N'Zoth and got 75 gold.
Yeah.
I think a part of this from Blizzard's end might be that the way that people are rewarded in World of Warcraft is stuff that equals player power, but if they sort of do that for all of the quests, then, for a lot of people, they expect, I face mild difficulty, I get some form of reward. And if that's not happening, then what do you do? I mean, who knows? There could have been a situation where, like, it's anima or something like that, and you just get a whole chunk of it for doing the harder content. Hard to say exactly, but there's humongous potential, I think, is the basic thing here. I think about us in the Harpy area to the north of the Barrens on classic launch night, getting destroyed by those Harpies, where that was like real small, tiny stakes. But we were on this very simple journey for our characters that was meaningful. And that really worked. That was a bit where questing really, really, really worked. For some people, leveling up a fresh character and maybe in a world a bit more like Classic or TBC where it's like slower and you can really die if you pull too many mobs, you know, where you actually have to think about your gameplay when you're leveling. You know, that's just a version of the game that, you know, to the people who only care about the end game stuff, and, you know, are just there, the way they play WoW is pushing Mythic Plus keys forever, and that's just what they do. Well, to them, leveling up a character is just a boring thing that they don't want to do, in the same way that they, you know, maybe don't want to go get Soul Ash and Torghast.
Yeah.
So it's a really tricky thing. It's like, you can't actually, other than the bits of content that WoW places on a pinnacle, which is raiding, Mythic Plus, and then sometimes PvP when they remember about it.
Yeah, there may be less pillars of endgame, more the top of the pillars.
Yeah, it's like, if something is not one of those bits of content that is put up on a pedestal as like, this is a premium slice of WoW content, it's like there's not the courage to actually have a full commitment. Yeah. Because I think they really do want people to see all of the content that is there.
Of course.
So it's really tricky. I don't really know how to get around that situation with a game that is as big as World of Warcraft, and with the player expectations being where they are. And I actually think that's one of the real powers of the likes of Classic TBC and Classic, because it's so agreed upon, like the player expectations. Yeah. And so many of those expectations are like a repudiation of what player expectations are for the modern game. And that kind of means that just that slower, more considered stuff is more acceptable. It's that sort of thing where the likes of us, MMO Champ, Wowhead, everybody who makes guides, all of that stuff, everybody who has a DPS meter, don't worry, I've had one like since forever, but like, we've all fostered this super not role-playing game way of playing a massively multiplayer online role-playing game that I wonder if for a bunch of the developers at Blizzard, their personal thoughts are just kind of like, oh, we're passionate about this world, we're passionate about this story, we want to do all this stuff, but we're in this weird situation where what is World of Warcraft even anymore? And where it's just hard to actually dial all those things in. So it is very interesting that like somebody asks us one question about how could you make questing better in World of Warcraft, and it instantly goes into a big thing about like the fundamentals, the very fundamentals and essence of the game, the player expectations, that shifting over time. And I think that is more just to speak to how it's a bloody complex, hard thing, because if there is a version of Bastion that would take like 15 hours to complete.
Oh, please.
15 hours to complete. That was way harder. Way harder. Where like, you know, instead of doing really janky, you know, sort of in-game cuts, you know, the in-game sort of weird, they don't look good, and you know, you're not controlling your character anymore, so you're completely ripped out of the experience, and you're no longer looking at these events through your own eyes, and you just kind of get this bad cinematography floating about the place. I wish they just stopped those in-game cutscenes. They kind of suck. It's way better when, you know, you're just walking, like your character's just going, doing a thing, and, you know, Urel's beside you, just saying something. You know, you don't need to stick the camera in the character's face. But, you know, a version of Bastion that was way longer, where all of those storylines were way longer and actually have way more character moments. I guess there's a little bit of me, and, you know, maybe it's because, you know, Preach has been doing his RPG March and all of that stuff, and maybe some of us are thinking about experiences like that. And yeah, maybe if Blizzard felt like they had a little bit more freedom to just go super long in those stories. And I think, if I was to look back to what I sort of ranted on about a bit earlier, that's where I'd like to see more Suramars, because I think that's where Blizzard would actually have the freedom to make that stuff as expansive as they want, without having to worry about a whole bunch of people wanting to level for the new expansion so they can do their endgame content, and therefore want to just rush through. So they almost need to make this like rushable quest content. So a funny situation questing in the game. Yeah, I guess learn the lessons from Classic, and is there a way that we could work out just the gameplay being a little bit more sharpened up? I mean, I'd be totally willing to have almost like a hard mode of going out my front door in World of Warcraft.
Of course.
I might actually be the player where, if you could work it out that I could just turn on hard mode and, I'm actually playing. And, then when I get to the boss in my Covenant campaign, it actually beats the shit out of me and gives me some mechanics that I've got to learn. I mean, if you could give me even a hard mode for just the Covenant campaigns, then, perhaps we could actually get some more interesting stuff going on. Yeah, interesting.
That's a very good idea. I kind of like the idea of maybe not a hard mode for the full campaigns, because that seems a little bit out of scope generally, but they do so much work on all those set pieces, and they do some design for the set piece stuff. Like there are mechanics you have to do. They're just utterly pointless and really easy. So it's like if they spend another while balancing and getting a hard mode of those scenarios, which aren't called scenarios anymore, but
yes,
I think actually that might work. But I think if I had one bit sort of direction for Blizzard to look in for how to make gameplay feel a bit more engaging without being too hard or having like too high APM requirements, it is just make players think about where they're standing and make what they're doing feel a little bit oppressive and difficult, and have them like plan for it.
Yes, the sort of, in Classic, you've got the inevitability of white damage.
Yeah.
Right, the enemy's auto attacks. You kind of know that's coming. You're always playing around that. And then if an enemy just has one or two simple abilities and you are a little bit more pressured, yeah, you're shitting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're kind of like crazy Power Rangers now. So that doesn't happen as much because... Also, it's the case that, a Mythic Plus dungeon with a Classic character... you'd run into severe issues, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you can have the superpowered god character with so many different abilities, and like a modern WoW character, and yeah, they're going to cream the leveling unless the leveling is meant to really be a hard video game challenge, because a character with such a strong toolkit would need to be challenged pretty hard mechanically to make leveling a challenge. But that sort of character doesn't really work as well for the immersive leveling experience. But then you kind of like, that classic sort of way of doing things, classic TBC way of doing things, it wouldn't really work for the end game content of today as much.
Yeah, they certainly have more than a couple of problems to solve with the fact that everyone has so many tools all the time.
Yeah, it's like they almost need to have World of Warcraft, go, 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 G Fuel, Gunnar glasses, time trial, Giga mode, and then World of Warcraft slow for boring old people. Maybe we just call that WoW Modern and Classic Plus, and we just call it a day. But I guess that does also give you the sort of thing of, should we just be sitting here trying to work out ways that we could get classic-y things into Modern, when maybe the best thing is, instead of trying to shore up weaknesses or anything like that, maybe what's best is actually trying to double down on what makes Modern modern. And that is a totally other way of doing design, and one that equally will have its wins and its losses, but something to think about. We should, however, get on. We should ever get on with the show.